What if I told you that inflation, not war, not famine, not political chaoses, quietly shattered more empires than any invading army ever has? It sounds impossible. Inflation feels like a modern annoyance. The price of eggs rising, rent creeping up, salaries never keeping pace. But what if inflation isn't just an economic trend, but a repeating historical pattern, a force that topples civilizations, rewrites borders, and reshapes global power? Today, we're going to uncover a mystery. Why do the greatest empires in history rise? The Ming Dynasty, the Ottoman Empire, Weimar Germany, even modern nations collapse shortly after losing control of their money. And more importantly, are we watching the same pattern unfold right now? Stay with me, because once you see the pattern, you will never look at money or history the same way again. Before we unravel history's inflationary catastrophes, we need to understand one thing. Every empire builds its strength on something more fragile than armies or kings. Its financial system. Rome had its silver denarius. China had its intricate paper money system. The Ottomans relied on a gold-silver standard. And modern nations, they rely on fiat currencies backed by trust alone. But here's the twist. Inflation rarely begins as a crisis. It starts as a decision, a policy, a temporary fix, a solution that buys time at the cost of future stability. And across history, rulers, governments, and emperors all discovered the same dangerous truth. When running an empire becomes too expensive, debasing the currency looks like a miracle until it destroys everything. So let's follow the timeline step by step, through the origins, the rise, the breaking point, and the aftermath of inflation across the world's greatest empires. Chronological, cause and effect origins. When inflation begins quietly, Rome. The silver that disappeared. Our first stop is ancient Rome. At its height, Rome relied on the silver denarius, a coin so trusted it powered trade across 3 continents. But running an empire is expensive. Legions, roads, aqueducts, grain subsidies, all required money the empire didn't have. So emperors found a clever trick. Reduce the silver content of the denarius, but keep its face value the same. At first, nobody noticed, but over decades, the silver vanished from almost pure silver to less than 2%. This wasn't a mistake. It was policy, and it set the empire on a path it could not escape. China, the invention that backfired. Centuries later, the Song and Ming dynasties created one of history's greatest innovations, paper money. But printing money is a temptation no government resists for long. During military pressure from Mongol invasions, the state printed more notes to pay soldiers, then more for public projects, then more to stabilize markets. Paper money went from miracle to curse. Inflation surged. Prices tripled, then doubled again. Entire regions abandoned state currency. The Ottoman Empire. The falling silver aki, like Rome. The Ottomans slowly reduced the silver content of their currency, the aki, to finance wars and palace expenses. Coin clipping, debasement, and corruption eroded trust. And trust once lost eyes, nearly impossible to recover. The pattern behind the origins. Across civilizations, inflation begins not with panic, but with pressure. Wars, overspending, debt, political unrest, declining revenues. The first cause is always the same. Leaders look for money they don't have and take the shortcut. The rise. When inflation starts to hurt as inflation grows, its effects spread like cracks through an empire. Rome's crisis of the 3rd century. Inflation triggered a chain reaction. Soldiers demanded higher pay. The government minted more low-quality coins. Tax collectors demanded payment in goods instead of currency. Barter replaced trade. Local economies fragmented. It wasn't just inflation. It was economic unraveling. China's market rejection. As the Ming dynasty printed more and more notes, people stopped accepting them. Farmers refused payment. Merchants demanded silver or grain instead of paper. Regional authorities issued their own currencies. Money lost meaning and, once that happens, authority loses meaning with it. The Ottoman social breakdown. Inflation hammered artisans, farmers, and soldiers. Janissaries, the elite military class, rioted more than 20 times in 150 years. Almost always because their pay no longer kept up with prices. Once your military stops trusting the currency, your empire is living on borrowed time. The breaking point, when trust collapses, every inflation crisis eventually hits a moment when people, collectively, lose faith in the system. Rome's hyperinflation. By the 3rd century, Roman prices were doubling every few years. Grain, once affordable, became impossibly expensive. Armies deserted. Border defenses collapsed. The empire survived, but it was never the same. And its currency never recovered. China's monetary erasure during the late Ming period. Paper money became so worthless that 1,000 notes could not buy a loaf of bread. The government attempted to enforce acceptance, but you cannot legislate trust. The note system collapsed. People reverted entirely to silver, ending China's experiment with early fiat currency. The Ottoman Empire's dual economy. By the 1800s, Ottoman currency became so unstable that taxes were demanded in foreign coins. Salaries were paid in debased currency. Inflation exceeded 200 to 400% in some regions. The empire wasn't invaded from the outside. Its economy imploded from the inside. The fallout. What inflation destroys. Inflation doesn't just raise prices. It destroys savings. Trade systems, military, loyalty, government authority, social trust. This is the real danger. An empire can survive corruption. It can survive war. It can even survive famine. But no empire can survive the loss of trust in its money. Failed fixes. The desperate final stage. And here's the tragic part. Every empire tries the same failed solutions. Rome imposed price controls. Disaster. China executed counterfeiter suits. The Ottomans reminted coins, repeatedly temporary at best. Once inflation spirals, every solution creates a new problem. Price controls. Black markets. Forced currency acceptance gives rebellion. Printing more money gives faster collapse. History shows that empires fall not when inflation begins, but when leaders try to fix it. Modern parallels, shocking data, and repeating patterns. We like to believe we're more advanced than ancient empires. But the numbers tell a different story. Today, over 30 countries are experiencing double-digit inflation. Several nations have seen inflation above 100% in the last decade. Global debt exceeds $300 trillion, the highest in history. Major currencies have lost 80 to 98% of their purchasing power over the last century. Even the strongest modern economies rely on money printing, expanding debt, artificially low interest rates, massive deficit spending. These are the exact triggers that launched inflation in Rome, the Ming Dynasty, and the Ottomans. The pattern is repeating. The question is, where does it end this time? 3 key takeaways. 1. Inflation is not a modern problem, it's an imperial pattern. Every great civilization has battled it, and most have lost. 2. Inflation always begins with good intentions and ends with the collapse of trust. When the money loses credibility, society follows. 3. The modern world is repeating the same steps, only faster and on a global scale. The stakes today are higher than ever. A final warning: if history teaches us anything, it's this. Empires don't fall when their enemies grow stronger. They fall when their money grows weaker. And right now, every indicator suggests the world is entering one of the most inflation-sensitive periods in history. If you want to understand the forces shaping our future, make sure to subscribe, like, and share this video. Because in upcoming episodes, we'll dive deeper into the financial patterns that decide the rise and fall of nations. Thank you for watching, and stay curious.